it is very transitional. So that whole human relationship with people, building connections, listening, all these different factors that play a part.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers, and in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with industry specialists, practitioners, experts when it comes to the business process management realm. If you are joining us for the first time, a warm welcome to you. You are now part of a community of process practitioners. This series has been going on for a number of years now. We've captured hundreds of episodes relating to business process management. So there's a huge database of episodes for you to go back and listen to or watch on all of the different various platforms if you're interested. And for those that have been us for some time now, a warm welcome back to you. We would really appreciate a rating and review. We're always looking to promote this topic of business process management and spread the word, get the word out. I've had received many amazing testimonies and feedback over the years from people that have really been encouraged by this series, that have connected with other industry practitioners, that have felt that they've been able to learn from others that are day in and day out putting business process management into practice. So it's really fantastic to see, and a rating and review is certainly going to help us to continue to spread this word, this message. And in today's episode, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Sanya Naumovich-Popovich, who we've actually had on the series before. We had her on the series about just over a year ago. I think it was early 2022 when Sanya joined us. Sanya is a BPM consultant working across many different organizations, or has worked across many different organizations, and has a strong focus on the financial services space, or a strong expertise in that space. So very excited to have Sanya join us back on the podcast. Sanya, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel. Nice to see you again.
Now, I caught up with you recently, Sanya. Obviously, I managed to make a trip across the ditch to New Zealand, to Auckland, and it was fantastic to meet with you in person there. And I know that on this trip, I was meeting with a range of organisations there, and coming home from this trip, one common, observation I made from meeting with a range of organizations that are investing into process was that I was actually meeting up with a lot of women, a lot of women that were actually leading and pioneering process in this space, and I think it stood out to me, and I made that observation because I wouldn't say that's the norm. I wouldn't say that there's an overwhelming amount of women in the business process management space, although the ones that are, from my observation, are doing exceptionally well and are oftentimes leading the teams and leading the center of excellences. But can we, I guess, start the conversation there? And I'd be interested to understand from yourself what's your experience been like? Is there a lot of women involved in the process space, or are there not as many as we should be expecting?
I would say certainly I would like to see more women in the space. And over the years, I was hoping that since many years ago, when I attended university and started my professional life, I was often the only woman in the room, and technical fields were often dominated by male. Women certainly, and it isn't just a gender, every one of us, I think, brings something different to the role. And it is great to see variety, to see different cultures, to see globalized networks like the one you have, when people actually get together and share experiences from different industries and different countries as well. But I still think it is unfortunate that we don't see that many girls going in the technical fields. and perhaps being interested more in the business process management. So it will be interested. So that is, it is interesting as to why that would be the case. And often you may say that perhaps countries that are Western countries, you would expect to see more to be the case. But it is actually, when you compare the numbers and girls in STEM, the countries that are more perhaps conservative, you would think of them as a conservative countries. There is a much higher number of girls in the technical space. And so it would be great to encourage girls to actually try things and maybe have confidence that they can make it and be successful.
And would you attribute that all to the lack of confidence, as you're saying? Would you say that there's a lack of confidence that women can jump into a technical realm and I guess do a significant addition to the work that's going on there?
I think that there were countries where tradition, for example, even some Western countries, when girls, and I was surprised to hear that, when girls were offered positions that or suggested roles that are seen as more kind of women roles as opposed to, which again is generalization. So the question is, I guess we have passed that point now, but still we are seeing girls choosing different professions more, and I wouldn't say that they're necessarily inclined, because the school records show that they have improved and they're even in some areas showing great results. But still, when it gets to choosing profession, perhaps don't. And I don't know if it is upbringing, perhaps, or in general, the interest or the environment that influences perhaps certain fields to be more attractive.
I mean, it could even be a perception of the nature of the work. It could be even a perception of what the work may entail. But I think that when it comes to business processes specifically, on the surface, it may sound very technical. However, there is a lot of relational elements to it. There's a lot of working with people. There's a lot of things that when you think of business processes, you wouldn't typically maybe associate it with a very people-heavy, relational ready type of work.
Exactly. And that is definitely the truth. I think it's I think that possibly it will be interesting, but certainly would be nice to see more balance. I think you were quite lucky, or coincidentally, that you had a lot of people that you met that they were not, that it was a different mix, which is great to hear. But often the reality is slightly different, or the majority, and it would be nice to actually see the dial shift a little bit. Yeah.
Yes. And obviously there's we can't generalize. There's obviously, every individual has different strengths and weaknesses and pros and cons and things like that. However, I think that from, when I came home from this trip to New Zealand and I had made that observation and I was thinking through it, I guess my biggest takeaway is that, as I've been saying, process is so heavily dependent, or that the success of process management is heavily dependent on how well you can work with people, because we might be capturing processes, but at the end of the day, we're working with people. We're working with senior leaders. We're working with frontline operational employees, where every person in an organization is involved in a process in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to be having, it's not just about, capturing process maps. It's about bringing people along a journey. It's about empowering people to contribute to the processes and enabling them to be able to play a key part in improving and optimizing processes, because the people that are performing these processes, they're probably in the best position to add value to the work that's getting done.
Exactly. And as you said, it is the big part is actually relationships. And how do you translate or make it clear? Even if you think about modeling a process, it can be done in many ways. How do you make it that people that do the job actually feel connected with the output? And that it actually tells their story, as opposed to, because it can it can be done in many different ways. How do you ensure that it really tells their story and resonates with them?
And obviously it's this topic around women in business process management or women in technology. There are a number of key pioneers in the space that are really doing a lot to help continue to promote and bring awareness and encourage women that you can play a significant part in these fields. There's a community based out of the States, I believe, called Women in Process Mining, and we've had two of the leaders of the community come and share with us on this podcast series a while back now. But there are people that are obviously doing what they can to encourage more women to join this space or to be involved in the business process space. From your perspective, Sanya, what would you say? How can we encourage more women to be involved in business process management?
I think what you said earlier, and I really like that the fact that you cannot really just think of it as a technical field. So there is a field there that there is a technical aspect, but there is also a lot of aspects that you can transfer from other roles. And it is very transitional to that whole human relationship with people, building connections, listening, all these different factors that play a part. That and I think that I did listen to that podcast with, I think, Gabriella, and I'm trying to remember the other lady's name. And it was really nice and interesting what they're trying to do. So I think that having these groups and making them more visible to people would certainly help encourage girls. I think it is, it is not purely technical, and but there are aspects of technical. So it will be nice to see that dial shift and balance, probably a bit more balanced profession in that sense. Yeah.
Yes, great. No, that's awesome. And I know that as I touched on in the introduction, you obviously have a lot of experience in the financial services space, and I've recognised that in financial services that there is often a strong emphasis on process management. Why would you say that? Even more than a lot of other industries or most other industries, why would you say that there is such a strong emphasis on understanding your processes in financial services?
So I guess there are probably a couple of reasons. One would be regulatory requirements that are quite strong in the financial space. And then also there is often with these regulatory requirements certain criteria what organizations need to meet in terms of revenue, in terms of number of customers to actually have to comply with the legislation. And often big financial institutions, being banks or insurance companies, fall in that space. So that whole regulatory legislative environment would bring the reasons or importance of understanding business processes, and which I always like to talk about, evidencing having sustainable compliance, which means you have processes mapped, linked with risks, obligations, and controls, and you can evidence compliance sustainably. And I guess that whole legislative regulatory environment puts that as at the front of mind, as opposed to maybe organizations where that isn't the case. And even though they realize the importance of business processes, they realize importance of understanding the business, and not just each individual business area understanding their little bit, but having that cross-functional, cross-business unit across the organization understanding, which brings where the value really comes from. Even though they know that the value is there, it's not at the front of mind. It's always something, it would be nice. It's more like nice to have as opposed to having to have that. So another place where I would like to see the dial shift, but will it happen soon? I don't know.
And it's an interesting with the way you put it. It's a lot of people see it as a nice to have. Why do you think that people view process in that sense? It's a nice to have. It's not, it's not such a big deal if we ignore business processes, or I mean, they're probably not thinking that, but it's, I guess, but that whole thinking of like, oh yeah, we'll get around to it. If it's not prioritized, you'll never end up doing it. Why do you think people do ignore business processes?
I think that probably there is not realizing. I think it is quite possible not realizing that cross-functional, cross-business value, and not thinking about it in that way. So often organizations think about processes as a worksheet of almost a checklist of things to do. As each employee, I need to tick, 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 do this. And it's thinking of that in that kind of format, more of a procedural than cross-functional business process. And potentially not realizing the value of the cross-functional, the value that brings, and the importance of having that. And then often, if the procedural focus is the focus, then that is quite sufficient to get away with a little note or a piece, It's
yes.
not, and so therefore it doesn't get prioritized. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then what would the consequences be? Obviously there would be many consequences depending on the organization, depending on the challenges that are being faced. But what would you say are the main sort of consequences that you've come across for not understanding and managing processes well?
So there is a lot. So for example, what top of mind would be, let's say you're implementing a new system, you don't have a clear understanding of your processes. You need to invest time to understand. You may choose to do that, and therefore there is a cost to the program of doing it. Or you may choose not to, and therefore pay the price because you have implemented something on top of something you don't really understand. In both cases, if you had processes defined and mapped, it is a source of value and truth that you can rely on and take. Then every time, if you're doing multiple initiatives, every time you do one, you need to do that.
Yes.
If legislation is changing, if any change is needed, you need to understand your current state to be able to put anything future on top of it. So you really are constantly on the back foot, and you're investing. If you think about investment, you're overall investing more than if you had invested in the first place and put processes or structure in place, governance to enable a single source of truth.
Yes, yeah. It's like a builder putting together a house, or maybe doing some renovations on a house. without actually knowing where the plumbing runs or where the electrical cables run or where does the load-bearing wall sit in the house. Like if the builder doesn't know what the current setup of the house is like, then how can you possibly make renovations or changes to the house? I mean, you might knock out a wall thinking, oh yeah, it's fine if I knock out this wall, but then there could be you'll uncover some other challenges or problems or difficulties, or you might decide to cut through a wall, and then all of a sudden you've cut through one of the pipes in the house without realizing it. You had no visibility that was there. So yeah, I can fully relate or resonate with what you're saying there. You need that visibility. You need that transparency from an end-to-end perspective. I guess in an organizational context, it's more about, if we make a change or an impact to this part of the process, what's going to happen upstream, downstream in this process that I manage. And not only that, but what happens upstream, downstream before this process even begins. And you know what, the process that happens prior to this, I'm not even involved in that. I'm not even involved in the process that comes after this, but how do I know that the changes I'm making here isn't going to have a negative impact either side, and also across the architecture as well. I think it's so important to have that visibility and transparency. What would you say from your experience and what you've observed are the biggest reasons for change, or the biggest forces on a process to make it change?
You in the context of to make the change to. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking me, sir.
Of course. So obviously there's, all people need to better understand their processes. As you were saying, you need to understand what your current state is so that you can better make a change. Again, obviously in every organization, change happens for different reasons. We've obviously been through a couple of years of the pandemic, and that obviously made things very turbulent. And then there's also regulatory changes that happen from time to time. And then, there's also, and regulatory changes can happen for a number of different reasons. I mean, I think there's a big focus on sustainability and how can we create sustainable processes. But I guess the question is around from your experience, what are the biggest impacts that changes a process? Yeah.
So I think quite many, really. So if you think it could be implementation of a new system, it could be system replacement, it could be bringing a new product, introducing a new channel. Regulatory, as you mentioned, is a big part in financial industry. And each of them, each being small or a big change, as you mentioned before, even if it is a small change and you're thinking about implementing improvement in one area, again, how do you know that you're not by improving that or changing it, impacting negatively on processes around you or the entire ecosystem? So how do you ensure that anything that what you are implementing is actually implementing improvement as opposed to just negative kind of off balance in one area and improvement in the other. So all these, I think it's inevitable. Change is inevitable regardless whichever way we look at it. And each organization goes through changes, and depending on the industry and the drivers and the situation, environment, is what these changes are. But to be successful, you cannot, as you mentioned, the builders, and it is a very good, or architect, very good analogy is you cannot build something new if you don't understand what you're dealing with. And sooner or later, the problems will start and impact on the outcome.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And I think it's a very interesting topic. I think that oftentimes it can come down to the leadership that's in place. And so when leadership moves on and new leadership comes in, then the organization is oftentimes will change course or change direction based on the style of the new leader. And in some cases, they have an emphasis on process management. In other cases, they don't have a focus on process management. I think it's quite an interesting challenge that organizations face. And I've seen it happen over the years where an organization will go from having a very strong process-centric culture, leadership changes, and then all of a sudden process is almost like a dirty word around the organization. We don't do that anymore. Like we don't. Some people will even say we don't have processes here, and so I think it's a very interesting one and a very challenging one. But I think as process practitioners, we know the value in process. We know the value in understanding our processes, and sometimes we might find ourselves on a good wicket and having a lot of success with the work that we're doing. And then other times it's going to be more of an uphill battle where we go back to square one and we have to continue to prove the value of what process management is going to do. But I think for us as practitioners, we just need to come back to the fundamentals. We need to, in some cases, start small, prove the value, get those quick wins, show the value and celebrate the value. And I think that even if there is change in leadership, there have been many examples where the leadership team's been brought on this journey of process management and have come to a place where they're fully bought in, they're fully sponsoring that, the initiative. And I've seen that happen many times before throughout organizations. Obviously, it's much easier from a top-down approach, but there's still some significant impact that you can do from a bottom-up approach as well, or at least this is what I believe. But Sanya, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today. Obviously, we touched on a couple of different topics there. I think women in the technology space, in the process space, it's important. We need more women in the space. I'm impressed and amazed by the women that I meet in the space and the way they're pioneering, the way they're leading, the way they're contributing to the process space. I see a lot of work and progress being made there, but we want to be able to encourage, and we want to see more. We want to see more women jump into the space because there is so much value that can be brought across many different fields. There's some women that are very technical, and probably when they hear about the process space, it resonates with them a lot more than someone that is maybe naturally less technical, but there's still a lot in the space that is not so technical. In fact, a huge part of the space is the people element. And in saying that goes for both male and female as well. There's a lot of males there that are very people oriented. We need you in the process space. I would say the success of business process management hinges more so on the people element than the technical element. But again, that's how my perception and how I view it. But Sanya, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to connect again, and I'm sure the audience has got a lot out of this episode.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It was really nice to catch up again.